Alright, so today we're going to take a look at how to print labels using Fibery. And in order to print labels, you typically need a thermal printer. And I've got one here today. This is a Dymo Label Writer 450. One of the most popular thermal printers out there. If cars were thermal printers, this would be a Honda Civic or a Prius. Anyway, it's like super popular. You can find them everywhere. Bottom line is that they're super cheap and you can find them everywhere. Now let's try and hook this baby up to Fibery and print a few labels. Alright, so we're going to start things off with a very quick demo. As you can see, I've got a very straightforward database over here. I don't think I need to explain how to set up a database as simple as that. It's not even a database. It could have even been like a spreadsheet, but we're using Fibery, and this is what it looks like. All you have to really do is just request to print a label, and a second later, you get a label. There you go, with a QR code and everything. Now, let's take a look at how to set this whole thing up. So before we get started, 3 super quick tips. Tip number 1, if you don't have a Dymo printer, just like I have got here, that's fine. This method that I'm gonna show you now works for any printer, thermal, not thermal, laserjet, inkjet. It even works for scales, like electronic scales, believe it or not. Tip number 2, and that is get a bunch of extra labels. You're gonna need them in order to kind of like fine tune the label design to print out correctly. You're gonna burn through a lot of them. So get extra. Tip number 3, and that is if you're on Windows, I am on Windows, pay close attention to the printing preferences page. Now this is gonna make or break your label making project. Printing preferences and go into advanced, and then this particular drop down here was the catalyst to making this right. Now, I tried to follow the correct label code to the correct label drop-down choice, but that didn't really work. I had to test pretty much every single one of these choices until I found the one that works the best for me, and that was 30376. Now, believe it or not, my labels are of a completely different code. They are 11355s. Totally different code, but seems like they print much better when it's on this particular setting. So play around with that particular setting. All the other settings are kind of meh. They don't really work, or they have a very minimal effect on the design of the label. So yeah, that's it. Let's get started. Now, before we go any further, I would just like to say that we appreciate absolutely every single person who watches our videos. Now, we're trying to reach the target of 3,000 subscribers by the end of this year, December 31st, 2024, and we would really appreciate your help. Now, that's a lame target. That's why I was thinking that if we reach 10,000 subscribers by the end of this year, December 31st, 2024, I will shave my beard. Yes, I will say bye-bye to my pride and joy. I have a feeling I'm gonna regret this. Anyway, back to the video. Alright, so it's time to set up our printer, and it couldn't be easier. So I'm using a Dymo Label Writer 450. So naturally, I headed off to dymo.com, downloaded the drivers, and made sure that my printer was inside of my list of printers and scanners in Windows, just like so. So that was step number 1. The next thing that you need to do is you need to sign up for a service called printnode.com. There we go. This is a web page. Sign up, and once you've logged in, you will see a page like this one. Now, it's important to take note of your API key. It's located over here, so jump in there, make a note of your API key. In other words, you probably have to create it if this is your first time. But yeah, jump in there to get your API key so that we can set up the connection later and make.com, right? Yes, right. So the final thing that we need to do is we need to actually install PrintNode on our machine. How can you do that? Jump into downloads, and I'm on Windows. I just download this executable file, download it, install it, and you will need to open this up in the tray like I have got here. There you go. It will look something like this. Just make sure that you're signed in. You'll have to sign in into your account. Use the same username and password to log in, just like I've done here. And select the printers that you want PrintNode to see. In my case, it's just the Dymo Label Writer printer. That's it. Now, let's head on to Stencil and see how things work there. Okay, time to set up Stencil. And what Stencil is, it's the service that actually generates our little PDF, because print node needs a PDF of the label in order to print it, obviously. I mean, there's probably more complicated ways to do this, but this is my favorite way by far. And Stencil, generally speaking, is quite inexpensive for what it is. It's super easy to set up. So once you're ready, just sign up for Stencil. And once you've logged in, feel free to actually create a new project. Now, once you do create a new project, you kind of have to give it a name and all of that. I've already created a project, and within your project, you need to create a template. I've already created mine, but the most important thing that you need to note is the width and height of your label. Now, my labels are approximately 5 by something. So I converted that into pixels. You can use ChatGPT or something like that. And it was approximately so by so. I probably made a few adjustments along the way, but ultimately this is it. Now, from here, once you've set this up, you can start dragging and dropping elements like a QR code. And I've already set up my own, but you need to make sure that you note these little unique identifiers for each thing that you're dropping in to the system. For instance, my QR code is called QR code _1. Then I have this little text that is bold, that is text 2. And this text that is not bold is text 3. Once you've set this up, don't forget to press Save Template. Now, I'm going to save it, and I'm going to go back to templates. It's really important to note that your API key for Stencil goes based on the project. So jump into settings and you should see your API token over here. Make a note of this API token. We're going to need this later on when we set up make.com. Speaking of make.com, let's go ahead and see how that whole thing works. Okay, so we're at the final stretch. We just have to set up the automation that actually does everything. And for that, we're going to be using make.com. If you haven't got a make.com account, go ahead and check out our description. There's a link down there where you can get a whole month free of the pro account, and it's going to help the channel. So yeah, thanks. Now, as soon as you're in there, go ahead and create a new scenario. Now, this whole workflow is split into 2 parts. Scenario number 1 deals mainly with the cases of generating the design and stencil or reprinting labels. And we're going to take a look at that in a sec. The second part of the scenario is actually listening to Stencil. As soon as Stencil is ready with the design, when you're printing it the first time, it will let us know when it's ready. And as soon as it lets us know, we just go ahead and print it and update Fibery. And we're going to take a look at both of these scenarios separately. But the first one is right in front of you. And to set this up, all we have to do is just begin with a custom webhook. As soon as you create it, just press add and copy the address that you get to clipboard. Jump back into Fibery and click on automations. Over here, we have our print label rule. It's just an automation rule that I've created. And the rule kind of goes like this. When an item gets updated, an item in our database gets updated, and more specifically within that item, the field print label is updated. And even more specifically, when that print label field is checked, then we go ahead and update that record, that Fibery record in the field of label printing status. We just say starting up. Now we just want to print like a little note to the user that, hey, we're starting up the whole process. From there, we have the script that kind of goes like this. Just make sure that you copy all of this, but replace this particular webhook, this over here, this part over here, up until this question mark, with the webhook that you got from Make. This thing, the one that you copied just now. Paste this in, press save. That's it in terms of the trigger. Simple as that. Now, from there, what happens is that as soon as you trigger the automation, you get this little payload, which includes the record ID, the Fibery record ID. From there, we create a new search entries module Fibery module, where we search for that particular record ID. And as you can see, I've picked my database and my table, and I'm searching for that particular record. It will, of course, find it, as you can see, and then we have a router. Now, like I've already explained, we have two paths. The first path is based on the fact that Stencil ID does not exist, and the second path, you guessed it, on the opposite, when the Stencil ID does exist. So in the case that it doesn't exist, we first need to let Stencil know that, hey, we've got a brand new label that we want to generate. Please design it. And first and foremost, you need to create a new connection. If you haven't done so already, press add, API key, just copy it from the place where I showed you earlier inside of your Stencil project. And from there, I've already done it, and this is something that you really need to do once. By the way, from there, the URL is like so, the method, and this is kind of like the most boring yet important part that you need to be aware of. So this little body, you need to copy from here, from test API. If you jump into your templates over here and you click on console, you've got the test API here, and you've got the body over here, right? So I'm just gonna choose PDFs, and it doesn't really change much, but copy this as is and paste it inside of this body, with the only change being this metadata field that you need to add. Please make sure that you add it as I've done here, and make sure that you map this ID over here. It's gonna be very useful later down the line, because when Stencil responds, we need to actually update Fibery. And you need to kind of include the Fibery ID within that Stencil response. And this is how you do it. So as you can see, I've replaced all of those texts over here that kind of act as placeholders with my dynamic stuff from Fibery, the public ID, the model, brand name, all of that good stuff. That's it. Press OK. And finally, we're updating Fibery to say, hey, we're printing. Now, once we hear back from Fibery, right? Actually, one minor thing over here that I completely forgot to mention is that when we're updating Fibery for the first time, we want to make sure that we print the Stencil ID that we get from this payload. Because when we want to reprint it over here, well, we need to know what the design on file is, so that we can just fetch it very quickly and print the label. Now, if you're printing for the very first time, like I explained earlier, we're passing data to Stencil, and we're kind of waiting for it to create the label for us for the very first time. And for that, we need to create a new scenario. Again, we're using a custom webhook. Copy this address to clipboard, and you need to copy this, and you then need to jump, and again, I'm going to go back to my templates. Click on these little three dots over here, and click on Integromat integration, and just paste this second webhook in here. So open this up, copy clipboard, paste this in, press save. That means that as soon as the label gets generated, Stencil will let us know. And as you can see here from this example, this is what the payload looks like. From there, we just go ahead and use print node. If you haven't done so already, just make sure that you add your connections. So copy that API key from print node and paste it in here. So add and put the API key in there. I've already done it. So now I can see my computers, I can see my printers. And the first thing that you need to know is that you need to choose content type, PDF URI. There's a few options. You need to choose PDF URI and add the PDF URL that you get from the webhook over here. That's basically it. Quantity 1, nothing else. Everything else is basically the same. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, here is that metadata case. So you see here, I'm creating a module that gets an item, basically searches the entities. And I'm actually getting that Fibery ID over here, the one that we just talked about. And I'm pasting this in so that I can actually get that item and update that item. I mean, technically we could really even skip on this, and you could kind of do this, I guess. No, actually, forget about it. Make sure that you that you keep it as it was. I shouldn't have deleted that, but basically we need our entity ID to be here. You could kind of do something like this with the entity ID coming from Fibery, but yeah, we're not gonna do that. Yeah, let me just refresh this because I want to show you how the rest of it is set up. There we go. So back at square one, we get that item using the metadata field, and from there we then update that entity like so. I'm printing my latest status of printing complete and the label printing status from this entity because I want to create a log, right, of what has happened during the printing process. That's basically it. Now, the final part that we haven't discussed is reprinting. So, because in this case over here, we've actually added the stencil ID, now whenever I'm trying to print the label again, it will go down this route where the stencil ID does exist. All I have to do here is just go to this URL. Again, I'm using a custom API call to Stencil. Method is get, and the stencil ID is mapped in there. From there, same old, I'm using the same setup, print node, the PDF URL that I get from module number 5, PDF URI is my content type. That's it. And I'm updating Fibery again with printing complete, like I did, when we're initially printing it. That's basically it. Simple as that. So that's it, guys. Hope you've enjoyed this little automation involving label printing. It's one of those things that a lot of our clients ask for, and there's not a lot of data on this process, I've found. So yeah, hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know down in the comments below if you want me to do more on this topic, and I'll be glad to check out your suggestions. That's it from me. I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers. Thanks.